Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. The campaign has settled down. Looks like Hillary won. Well, I think she thinks she still won, but that's interesting that she might end up with more popular votes, and that's going to stir up a little bit of antagonism, I think, about who really wins, and maybe we could talk about that later on sometime about how we could improve for minority parties, to get more coverage, have a more democratic system rather than the monopoly run by Republicans and Democrats.
That sounds good. Yeah.
But anyway, today I'd like to talk about foreign policy and in relationship to our president-elect, Trump. And this has to do with things that have been stirring, as most people have been watching the campaign. Things have been going on in Europe. Things have been going on with NATO. But Donald Trump has talked a little bit about NATO, and some statements contradicted others. But he did say some good things about NATO.
Yeah.
I like the idea of, maybe getting out of NATO a lot more than sending NATO a bill. But anyway, it's in the news now. And it has to do with this confrontation with Russia. And, of course, Trump has made a statement on that, too, which is more reasonable than Hillary was on how we take care and how we deal with Russia. But I want to read you some headlines here and get your reaction to this, whether this is a lot more important than the media has played it up to be, since they didn't even look at it during the campaign. It was really of no interest. But the headlines gives us a hint to what's going on. Here's one that says, NATO puts 300,000 ground troops on high alert as tensions with Russia mount. Okay, here's another one. NATO announces largest troop deployments against Russia since the Cold War. Okay, here's another one. They look like they're busy. U.S. sends largest ammo shipment in 20 years to Germany amid ongoing European buildup. Part of that military-industrial complex are alive and well. Yeah. We haven't gotten rid of them yet. And then here's another one that's interesting. This raises the subject about sending a bill to NATO and who's in charge. And there'll be a little tug of war over this one, because it says, NATO to Trump. Here's your marching orders. I don't think that'll be so easy, but, there's a lot of influence out there. But this sort of suggests that this could be an important issue. We've talked about Europe. We've talked more about the Middle East and Europe. We've talked about Ukraine. But this is a further acceleration of the artificial conflict, I think, with Russia, and the buildup. So, where do you think we're coming down on this? Do you think NATO is going to tell Trump what to do? Is Trump going to tell NATO what to do?
I think it's clear from what candidate Trump said to what President-elect Trump says, there will be a clash coming. If what he said about NATO, he's on record saying, what's so bad about getting along with Russia? And he said that many times. That's been his one consistent thing he said up until the end. So that viewed in the context of all of these things you mentioned, unprecedented flow of weapons, troops, and ammunition right up to Russia's border. The question is, what will Trump do about this? Will he be in control? Will he be able to tell his new administration, the military, it's time to pull back from this? Or is the deep state going to be in control of the military, no matter who sits in the White House?
Right. And even those who are behind this buildup, and the various special interests do this, they actually admit, we don't expect Russia to have their tanks rolling over Ukraine right now or into the Baltic area. They don't expect that. But they do recognize, which everybody should recognize, accidents happen, unintended consequences, and some sinister force out there might have a false flag incident, something come up, there was a false flag blaming Russia on some of the problems in the election. It's an easy target. And that always bothered me because I was more optimistic, and I still keep my fingers crossed because there's a lot of economic activity between Russia and Europeans and with us, and trade has built up tremendously since the end of the Cold War. But and there's still a lot of that going on, but there is a lot of activity here. but they use words that I think they're just looking for trouble, because their excuse for doing this is it's to deter Russian aggression. They're already the aggressors, and what they would use, is Russia in Syria right now, not willing to look at the differences between being invited in and defending an ally and having a military base there versus other countries marching in and getting involved in the war.
Of course, we have bases and troops in however many hundreds of countries. We defend our ally, the Philippines, against Chinese aggression, as we call it. That's all okay. But, the NATO buildup on Russia's border. I mean, here are some, you mentioned a couple of the specifics, but 600 containers of ammo to Europe, the biggest in 20 years. That's just a week after announcing 6,000 tanks going to Eastern Europe. The tanks are part of Operation Atlantic Resolve. 330 U.S. Marines are deploying to Norway in January, right near the Russian border. Ballistic missiles were installed in Romania this year, and they'll be installed in Poland next year. And that's all up on Russia's borders, and it supposedly has to do with Russian aggression.
So, we want to get ourselves out of there. That's our position. Of course, Trump says he'd like to get out of NATO, but then his fallback is, well, we'll send them a bill, which I don't have a lot of confidence on. But what I see here coming is it's really they do what we say. I don't think NATO's really going to tell Trump what to do. That's not going to happen. But the road we're moving on here with all these weapons and things, you think, even if you argued favorably for the military-industrial complex, well, take it easy. That's a lot of money that's coming in here, and that's helping our unemployments here. So the weapons industry is making money. But the whole thing is, it might be our own money. The way we finance things and the way we do these deals and we make loans and all this. And it is estimated by RAND, and they'll probably be fairly RAND Corporation, not the other RAND. The RAND Corporation are saying, well, yeah, this is going to be costly to maintain troops like this. And their estimate is like $2.5 billion a year. But that almost sounds not huge compared to what happens. Look at what happened to the proposed cost of going into Iraq. Remember what it was supposed to be rather small? Yeah, and then all of a sudden it's into the trillions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, NATO is in a funny situation. And I think, if Trump is taken for his word, what he might be saying to NATO is, hey, if you think Russia is such a threat and you want NATO protection, then you need to step up to the plate and up your own defense budgets if you think they're such a threat. If that's the case and he sticks by his word, there could be some differences. But, Stoltenberg in the article you mentioned brought up the issue of Article 5, reminding Trump, you've got Article 5 obligations. And you hear that bandied around a lot. But, that is not an automatic switch to the U.S. to go to war to defend Estonia. Article 5 just says that if it's invoked, each country within its own legal structure, is required to consider going to war. It doesn't supersede the U.S. Constitution and the obligations of Congress, as you know better than anyone. but a lot of people, I don't think, get that.
Well, I think another healthy thing going on right now is the unification of NATO is not quite as strong as it used to be, even though we run the show and it's our money and we're sick and tired of it. There's some dissension going on in NATO. For instance, right now, Italy would like to work more closely with Russia, and they don't like, putting on sanctions. But, the history of this thing in the last 25 years has been horrible. I mean, if you just look at what NATO did, it runs parallel with our complaints about our own government. Where have we been for 25 years? And even if they're even with Kosovo and Serbia, they were very much involved in Afghanistan. They're not involved in every single Libya. They were involved. Yeah. So, but to me, it almost looks like we use NATO to give us so-called moral authority. That's internationalism. We're following the law. NATO gave us a resolution, same way with the United Nations, that they passed these resolutions. But I think the dissension is sort of maybe there'll be a Brexit. Maybe Trump could pull it off, where he could actually get more people. Right now, though, it's a tough road to hoe, get the American people, because immediately, he's not up against a few people. He would be up against total media. You think they got after him in the campaign?
Yeah.
Well, what would they do if he tries to pull that off and try to leave NATO? If they're lying now already and distorting things, that Russia is aggressing around the world because they're putting some weapons around their borders, because the NATO is putting 300,000 troops around their border and parking missiles there. We've gone thousands of miles away from our home and parking defensive weapons, of course, all around Russia.
Well, I think there's a sense of the desperation among NATO, too. They've always been desperate for a new mission after the Cold War, whereas they should have been shut down. But it is a jobs program for a lot of people, for a lot of very well-heeled European failed legislators and stuff. But the immediately previous NATO Secretary General, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, he wrote a desperate article last week saying, please, the U.S. must be the policeman of the world. You can't step down from your role. And there's kind of a fear. But if Donald Trump is going to stick with his promise of trying to get along better with Russia, he's going to have to look at all of these things we've talked about and say, it's enough. We need to stop putting these troops on there. Will he be able to? Will he live up to what he said? The early signs of people that are being bandied around as a part of his transition, a little bit concerning. People like Bob Corker, who you remember very well from the Hill, Newt Gingrich as Secretary of State. These people have been extremely harsh in their anti-Russia rhetoric. So there's going to be sort of a day of reckoning, I think.
Yeah, and I think it is going to be a tug of war on this, and it's hard to know what actually happened. We have to recognize, and this comes up so often in discussions that I have interviews on, and that is the intentions of a president, maybe the intentions of even Obama or a Trump might be here, but also they have to deal with the deep state. They have to deal with the reality of the media and sanctions and what the CIA might do and all these things. So there's a lot of questions raised, and right now the control of the media is so strong. But the wonderful thing is that there's been this new invention called Wikipedia. And who knows how essential Wikipedia might have been, to alert to people to what was going on with Hillary. That our media didn't do anything. Actually, they were believing their own lies. I don't know whether you call them lies, their own distortion and canning of their reporting. And all of a sudden they say, what? We were wrong?
I think the New York Times said 97-point-something% chance that Hillary would win. The other thing about this defense spending, it is, as you point out, is very expensive to keep these troops there, to move this material and move all of these things over on Russia's border. But Donald Trump also promises to rebuild the infrastructure in the U.S., which we know is crumbling. So that is going to, if he's going to continue this rate of military spending overseas, something's going to have to give unless they put the printing machines on quadruple speed. But I think Americans at home are going to start getting frustrated very quickly if they see this buildup continuing overseas and their bridges crumbling back home.
Well, I think they're going to have guns and butter. I think the military, because if Trump sticks to his promise there, he's going to spend more money. He's out front and said this is it. And most of the people in Washington like that, in the military-industrial complex. They will. But I think Trump will live up to his promise about infrastructure. And, getting rid of waste and fraud and abuse isn't going to pay for it, the old story. So I think the deficits are going to explode. Right now, I mean, if you look at the financial markets, yesterday there was the price skyrocketing with bonds, which meant interest rates have been going up, and the price and the value of the bonds went down like to $1/3 of $1 trillion. Investors lost in one day. And so so that's a sign that inflation is coming. The other thing, even though gold has been doing this, silver has held steady because it's seen as an industrial metal. But the industrial metals have been doing real well, and copper, relatively speaking, is rather strong. And I think there's definitely a lot of inflation in the pipeline. They can't get rid of the amount of dollars that are sitting around. And now, once people perceive that dumping bonds, the value going down, and once they see, they might keep buying up stocks and all, but I think there's going to be a lot of inflation. I think that the price inflation that I'm talking about, and I think we see these early signs, but I predicted this whole process of whether our foreign policy or building bridges, I think spending is going to go up, and I don't think the economy, hopefully we get all the tax cuts and all of a sudden we deregulate and all this, but and have a healthier economy. But I don't think it can pay for this. They still won't address the real problem with the spending on the militarism or spending domestically on welfare or infrastructure. There's too much debt. You just can't pile on forever and ever. And there's never been the correction. There's never been liquidation. There's a lot of been investments in the wrong places. And you don't have true growth and a market. You don't have people working and saving and allocating resources to productive efforts. I mean, what we're just talking about all the spending. It's going to be government spending. Yeah, maybe the bridges should be paid for and built, but should that be a national interest? And, okay, we need $100 billion. We're going to put this into building bridges. Well, maybe that should have been done, more calmly in a diversified manner by individual states, counties, or community. But right now, and then they have to deal with the bankruptcy in the retirement funds, government and private. They're all insolvent. Yeah. So I think that's really where the time bomb is. But I also think that this kind of business of the military buildup. So this is the reason that we really should cross our fingers, encourage the supporters of Trump to say yes. Don't back down on this NATO thing, and not only just quit supporting NATO. Quit spending the money over there. That's a place I used to use that in my campaign all the time, is you bring the troops home. At least my argument was stop the militarism. It won't solve the problems. I don't support a lot of these social programs, but at least that way you might be able to tide it over. I reason that why cut child health care at a point when you can cut tanks that you don't need, and ammunition to sell. That's where I think the real problem is.
And Trump's big support was in the Rust Belt. You could imagine some Rust Belt guy. He's been on unemployment forever. He's miserable. He's looking over and he's seeing extremely wealthy countries, Germany and Sweden, and they're benefiting from the money that's taken from the rest of us to defend them. So I can't see that being too popular among these kinds of Trump supporters.
No, and I think that it'll be very interesting to see what happens, because there may be interest in the world to ratchet things up on purpose right now, because it's in limbo. I mean, what's Obama going to do if it looks like he has to respond militarily, if, they cross the red line and he doesn't want to look like a weak person? He's worried about, his reputation, and how will the Trump factor play? I would guess that Obama's interest would be, why should I stir up a war? That's not going to help my image and my how people think about me if I end up, with a weak economy and a war going on. So I think he probably will want to stay out of it and not say, oh, yeah, I'll have to react. I'm going to react. And here, Mr. Trump, it's all yours. You weren't very nice to the Democrats anyway, so I'll let you worry about it.
Maybe the deep state will give him a Bay of Pigs.
That's always possible, so who knows. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I think this is a very important issue. Obviously, foreign policy is important. NATO is important. I've argued the case out of NATO. I don't think tinkering will help. We shouldn't have been in it. It's an entangling alliance, and the whole thing is that whether it's a multilateral or a large entangling alliance, that means that we as a nation and as a generation commit ourselves to war and to fighting endlessly to the next generation. We we, saddle the next generation with debt and problems. That is the reason the founder said, at least stay out of European wars, and we don't need this. And I think this is an interesting time to have this discussion, because I would really like to see the momentum continue to challenge NATO. NATO has nothing to do with American security. If we had not been in NATO and United Nations and involved in these alliances, the last 25 years would have been quite different. We wouldn't have lost any American soldiers in combat, because we wouldn't have had to combat, and we wouldn't have been attacked. And for those individuals right now to say that we have to build this up because we want to prevent Russian aggression against us, I mean, that is nonsense. They may work around their borders and they may defend their interests in Syria, but they are not about to even invade any European country, and they're certainly not a threat to us. So I would say, why don't we argue the case for trade with people and friendship and diplomacy? Because I know, and I'm certain, that most of the people in this country aren't looking for a war. They're not saying, well, let's go to war with Russia today. It sounds like a great idea. I don't believe the Russian people want that either. It's just the governments that dig a hole for us, and they have the propaganda machine behind them, and they get pumped up with war propaganda, and the people go along because if they don't, they're considered unpatriotic, un-American, and they don't care about the troops. Well, if you really care about the troops, what you would do is get them out of harm's way and defend this country, and then that also would help us financially, because the threat of a financial crisis is very serious as well. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.